Welcome to another episode of History of the Popes, where we delve into the rich tapestry of the Church's leadership through the ages, not as a mere chronicle of dates and decrees, but as a reflection on the human drama of faith amid the shifting sands of history. Today, we turn our gaze to one of the earliest figures in this lineage, a man whose pontificate unfolds in the dim light of the 2nd century, when Christianity was less a grand institution than a fragile flame flickering against the gales of persecution and philosophical turmoil. We speak of Pope Pius I, the 10th successor of Peter, whose life and legacy remind us that the papacy, from its nascent stirrings, was always a ministry of quiet endurance, of safeguarding the deposit of faith in an empire that viewed it with suspicion or outright disdain. To grasp Pius I, we must first step back into the world he inhabited, a Rome of marble forums and teeming insulae, where the air carried the scent of incense from pagan altars and the murmur of Stoic debates in the marketplaces. It was the mid-2nd century, roughly the years 140 to 155, though our sources, as is so often the case with these early bishops, offer only approximate shadows rather than sharp outlines. The Annuario Pontificio, that meticulous ledger of the Holy See, places his reign from 142 to 154, but scholars like Eusebius and Irenaeus, drawing from even earlier traditions, suggest a span of about 15 years under the emperors Antoninus Pius and the early Marcus Aurelius. These were not the blood-soaked tyrannies of Nero or Domitian, but a subtler oppression. Christianity was not yet fully criminalized empire-wide, yet it simmered as an illicit superstition, a foreign cult prone to attracting the restless and the marginalized. Converts whispered their prayers in hidden house churches, and the Bishop of Rome, still more a presiding presbyter than a monarch in tiara, coordinated a network of communities scattered across the eternal city, like seeds on stony ground. Pius himself emerges from this milieu, not as a towering intellect or a fiery orator, but as a figure of humble provenance, emblematic of the Church's early genius for drawing sanctity from the overlooked. Tradition, preserved in the Liber Pontificalis and echoed by the Muratorian canon, tells us he was born in Aquileia, that northern Italian outpost on the Adriatic, perhaps in the late 1st century. His father, Rufinus, was a local man of modest means, and Pius grew up in a world where the empire's grandeur felt distant, buffered by the rugged Venetan hills. More intriguingly, he is said to have been the brother of Hermas, the author of that poignant 2nd century text, The Shepherd of Hermas, a visionary work of moral exhortation filled with parables of wandering souls and angelic guides, which was once so revered it nearly earned a place in the canon of Scripture. Hermas, in his own telling, portrays himself as a former slave who rose to become a prosperous freedman in Rome, employing the emperor's household and grappling with visions of ecclesial reform. Whether this sibling bond is historical fact or a pious conflation born of shared spiritual kinship, it underscores a profound truth. The early Church thrived not through aristocratic bloodlines, but through the transformed lives of the enslaved and the ordinary, those whom Christ had called from the margins. One cannot help but wonder how a man from such roots ascended to the Cathedra of Peter. The sources are tantalizingly sparse. No letters from Pius himself survive, no florid hagiographies like those that would later embellish the lives of more celebrated saints. Yet we glean from Irenaeus of Lyons that Pius was the 9th successor after Peter, following in the line of Linus, Cletus, Clement, and others, whose names evoke a chain of quiet fidelity. He succeeded Hyginus around 140, at a time when the Roman community numbered perhaps a few thousand souls, gathering in tituli, private homes turned sacred spaces, amid a population of 1 million pagans. As bishop, Pius would have presided over the breaking of bread in these intimate settings, resolving disputes with the gentle authority of one who knew the sting of social exclusion. His election, we may surmise, came not through intrigue or canon law, for those formalities were yet unborn, but through the acclamation of the faithful, a charismatic consensus guided by the Spirit, much as the apostles had chosen Matthias to replace Judas. Now, if the papacy in its infancy was a ministry of survival, Pius's tenure was marked by a deepening struggle for doctrinal clarity. A battle not with swords but with words against the seductive shadows of heresy that threatened to engulf the light of the gospel. This was the era when Gnosticism, that enigmatic cocktail of Platonic idealism and Christian borrowing, began to weave its tendrils into the Church's fabric. Gnostics like Valentinus, himself active in Rome during Pius's time, proclaimed a cosmos bifurcated between a flawed material world crafted by a lesser deity and a pure spiritual realm accessible only through a secret knowledge called gnosis. Matter, they taught, was evil, the body a prison for the divine spark within. Salvation came not through the incarnation's scandalous embrace of flesh, but through esoteric rites and intellectual assent. It was a philosophy tailor-made for the empire's educated elite, weary of imperial pomp, yet allergic to the gospel's earthy demands. Love your neighbor as this neighbor. Feed the hungry in their bodily need. Worship a God who stooped to a carpenter's manger. Pius, continuing the vigilant legacy of Hyginus, stood as a bulwark against this tide. Though no thunderous encyclicals bear his name, such genres awaited later centuries. Tradition credits him with confronting these errors head-on, perhaps through homilies in the house churches or letters now lost to time. Irenaeus recounts how Valentinus, undeterred by earlier rebukes, persisted in sowing discord, drawing followers with his eloquent myths of aeons and demiurges. And then there was Marcion, that shipowner from Sinope, who arrived in Rome around 140, his purse heavy with wealth and his heart heavier with a truncated faith. Marcion's heresy was a stark dualism. The wrathful God of the Hebrew Scriptures, he claimed, was an alien tyrant, wholly distinct from the merciful Father revealed by Jesus. With surgical precision, he excised the Old Testament from Christianity, compiling a mutilated canon that rejected Paul's letters, tainted by Judaizing, and favored only a Bowdlerized Luke. Excommunicated by Pius, likely in 144 or 150, as some chronologies suggest, this rejection did not silence Marcion. It birthed a rival church that would shadow Catholicism for generations, with its own bishops and ascetic rigor. In these confrontations, we see Pius not as a polemicist in the mold of a Tertullian, but as a pastor embodying the Church's instinct for unity. His responses were rooted in the apostolic tradition, that living memory of Christ's words handed down from Peter and Paul. To combat Gnostic disdain for the material, Pius would have affirmed the Incarnation's mystery, that the Word became flesh not to escape the world, but to redeem it, body and soul. Against Marcion's scissors, he upheld the harmony of Scripture, where the God of Abraham's promise is the same who raises Lazarus from the tomb. This was no abstract theology. It was a defense of the poor, the slaves, the women, and laborers who formed the Church's core. for whom the gospel promised liberation not in flight from history, but in its transformation. Beyond these doctrinal skirmishes, Pius's pontificate touched the rhythms of worship, those sacred patterns that bind believers across time. Catholic law, drawing from the Liber Pontificalis, attributes to him a decree on the date of Easter, that it be celebrated not on the 14th of Nisan, as some Eastern quartodecimans held, aligning with the Jewish Passover, but on the following Sunday, the Lord's Day. This paschal controversy, simmering since the Apostles, reflected deeper tensions, the Church's emergence from Judaism, its universal vocation beyond ethnic rites. Tradition whispers other contributions, each a thread in the Church's evolving garment. He is said to have ordered the compilation of the earliest Roman liturgical books, precursors to the Gregorian sacramentary, standardizing rites for a growing community, and in a gesture of inclusivity, he welcomed Jewish converts without requiring circumcision, baptizing them into the new covenant where faith, not flesh, marks God's people, a policy that echoed Paul's epistles and prefigured the Church's missionary outreach. Some accounts even credit him with erecting one of Rome's oldest basilicas, Santa Pudentiana, on the site of a house church, transforming domestic hearths into enduring sanctuaries. Whether these deeds are Pius's alone or the accretions of later piety, they evoke the bishop's role as builder, not of empires, but of communities where the Eucharist forged bonds stronger than blood. Perhaps Pius's obscurity is his most eloquent testimony. In an age when emperors deified themselves and heresiarchs sought fame through schism, this pope's legacy lies in fidelity, not fanfare. He died around 155, buried humbly in the Vatican necropolis, his bones later enshrined with Peter's, a silent communion of successors. As we reflect on Pius I from our vantage in the 21st century, what endures? In an era of ideological fractures, where echo chambers mimic ancient Gnostic silos and dualisms pit faith against reason, we see in him the Church's perennial task, to hold the tension of mystery, to proclaim a God who is both transcendent and immanent, creator and redeemer. His brotherhood with Hermas, real or symbolic, reminds us that visions of reform arise from the Church's laity, the slaves and visionaries who dream of a more perfect communion. And his paschal decree whispers that worship is resistance. By gathering on the 8th day, we subvert the 7-day cycle of toil and triumph, orienting time toward eternity. The history of the popes is at heart a history of the Church's pilgrimage, faltering, contested, yet graced. Pius I, that quiet Aquileian, embodies its dawn, a light kindled in obscurity, illuminating the path for those who follow. Until next time, when we explore another chapter in this sacred narrative, may the peace of Christ, the light of the world, guide your steps. If you enjoyed this study of the papacy, check out our other episodes, and we'll see you next time on History of the Popes. Until then, keep exploring the past to understand the present.